Okay, thanks so much, Eva, for agreeing to do this panel interview. I'm really humbled and honored that you agreed to do it. I don't know whether you remember this.
Thank you for inviting me for it.
You're welcome. I don't know whether you remember this, but we first met almost 30 years ago in Fox of 1988 at White Plains. I remember that meeting very well because I had read some of your papers that you did when you were a graduate student.
I admit I don't remember.
And then when you joined Cornell, I was a finishing PhD student. And I remember I was giving a talk on flows in planar graphs. And I was very impressed that you came to my talk and you asked a number of questions. Thank you. It was very inspiring to have you in the audience. You've done some amazing work, and I know many of our audience is quite familiar with your work. You have received many, many awards for your work as well. And I'm really humbled and honored to be able to ask you these questions. And I think not only the answers will be inspiring to me personally, but also I think for many of my students and many of my collaborators and many members of the community, we'd be delighted to hear your thoughts on some of these questions. Your own research has evolved from being very influential in the work of network flows, moving to approximation algorithms, facility location, influence in social networks, mechanism, and design and game theory. Where do you think your research is headed in the next decade? And also, how do you decide when you move to a new area, what would be the next thing that you're going to work on?
I'm certainly very opportunistic in what I want to work on. It's nice to work on something where the field is changing and moving. There are new opportunities and new questions and exciting possibilities of what can come out of my research and other people's research in the area. And that combined with that my knowledge or my past work offers a toolbox that might be useful in this area. Certainly in the past I moved like this, like seeing the connection between flows and optimization and the game theory area is what convinced me that I will have a set of tools that is useful in thinking about games. More recently, I got excited on, facing the complexity of finding Nash equilibria in games, that one should instead look at repeated games and learning behavior with repeated games, and then actually started to even think about, okay, so what are the right learning algorithms? Maybe one can think about learning as an area. I got interested between the mix of this is an exciting new area, it is a great behavioral model in games, and I believe given my past work in optimization, I carry a set of toolboxes that might be useful here, that hopefully is useful here. So what exactly I'm going to do next? There is a lot of exciting directions in both in game theory and in learning. And those are certainly some of the things I might want to continue exploring, at least for the near future. For the longer future, one should be open to opportunities.
Right. But I wanted to maybe go back to something that you said over lunch earlier today, which is the precise story of how you got into algorithmic game theory. If you can share a few words about that story, that would be great. I thought it was fascinating.
So that was around in the 99-2000 academic year. I spent at Berkeley, and Berkeley at the time had Christos Papadimitriou. Christos by then has been going around and trying to convince our whole community, in fact successfully convincing our whole community, that something fundamental changed in computer science. And while historically computer science was about controlling a computer to do certain algorithmic tasks for us, with the internet and with the connectedness of so many computers around the world, we should take incentive and cooperation and lack of cooperation between these computers more into account and think of it with a game theory perspective, which I found a fascinating new direction. And at the same time, one of the Berkeley theory lunches, Leonard Schurman was talking about Bayes paradox. So Bayes paradox is a routing paradox where you have a bunch of selfish traffic routing itself, trying to get to the destination as fast as possible, and then the network designer adds an extra edge. And from an optimization perspective, I think, well, there's an extra option that can only help, but turn out with selfish routing, it can hurt, and that's what the Bayes paradox is about. With the extra edge in, the traffic suddenly gets slower. And this is a fascinating example, and Leonard, it was, I think, a 20-minute talk, was just talking about this is a cool example and we should explore it more.
I see.
And my reaction to it was exactly sort of a ideal example of, I found this game theory interacting with computer science, a fascinating direction at the high level, as Christos was trying to convince all of us to do this. And then with the Braze paradox as an example, it seemed like, wait, this is about flows. I have worked on flows a lot. I have a toolbox to carry. It's very similar to what to things I have been doing. This is exactly the right topic where it's an exciting new question, it's the right toolbox, and that example and that theory lunch that Leonard gave.
That's great, because I first learned about the paradox too from your paper with Tim. So
I learned it from Leonard Schurman at the theory lunch.
I see. So your papers very often open up new directions of research for many of us. And I was going to ask you, to what particular skills besides your natural brilliance do you attribute the success to?
I guess a lot of luck also. I guess there's a different old story that I sometimes said and some people like, where as a graduate student I worked on a topic that someone suggested as an open problem. I was really proud of myself that I solved this open problem, and I gave a talk at some workshop in Bonn, and Laci Lovas, who is a great scientist and turns out my advisor's advisor, so my academic grandfather, was in the audience and very politely asked me afterwards that, yes, but why is this question interesting? And I was, I guess, a graduating student at the time.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, I haven't thought about that question. I felt rather embarrassed that I don't have a good answer to Laci's question. And made me realize that, wait, I can't just take someone more famous than me asking a question than I
and then
solve it.
Figure out the answer.
Figure out the answer and being proud of myself. I should be a bit more critical of, why am I interested? What's the big message? And I guess I think this is important. I think I was at the time a Hungarian, and I think American science is actually more pushing us with we regularly have to write NSF grant applications.
Right. What is the driving
application?
application?
Explain to the world of why is the area interesting that we're in. And I guess I took that to heart, and I still remember the story about Laci. And I think I tried my best to actually think about problems that will matter.
That's
a lot
great.
of it is luck.
No, absolutely. So even after my PhD thesis, I sort of changed directions a little bit myself, with somehow a similar kind of sense that I felt that the community I was in was somewhat of a closed community, whereas the tools and techniques we were building were of interest only to members within that community and not so much people outside. And so I sort of began to look at myself as well with a similar sort of light. The next question I have is that often many of us, when we're working on a hard problem, often when problem that, like you mentioned, is open for a while, and we might spend several days or weeks thinking about it and not make any progress. What keeps you keep going? Like, do you have some inherent belief to begin with that, I will get to the bottom of the solution, and then you keep at it for 6 months? Or because that's something that forces many of us after a week of thinking about a problem just to drop it and then maybe not even revisit it for a year or something.
Honestly, I do the same thing. At the end, if you long enough don't make progress on something, then thinking about it feels like banging your head against a brick wall, and which is not pleasant, and maybe makes you think of other side activities you could do instead, because research is too frustrating. So you need to keep if you really can't make progress on something, it's better to find something where you have an idea of what to do. Maybe more. Certainly compared to beginning graduate students, often they're not at all persistent. Maybe they're used to the fact that the problems they think about is homeworks, and as a homework has the two different features that research tends not to have. One is that the instructor assigning the homework already knows the solution, so
Right.
You know it's solvable. But second, that you even know it's solvable as a homework, that is, with a couple hours of thinking, you should be able to get there because it is homework.
Plus,
And research fails on both counts. You might not have a solution, and if you have a solution, it probably will take you more than a couple of hours to get there.
I see.
And so graduate students often have to be convinced that no, you shouldn't be giving up so fast. At the same time, some researchers get super stale because they want to solve the very, very same problem for a career, and then eventually they basically stop doing research because they're not getting anywhere on that one thing.
I understand.
So I think giving up on or switching problems is important, and ideally one should do exactly what you just suggested, that keep the old problem in mind, in the sense if you see something relevant, you recognize it, that hey, that there is this famous open problem that I used to think about where
I see.
this new tool might be useful.
I see. But with the homeworks, I wanted to add maybe one last comment, which is that at least when I was a PhD student doing homeworks, I would first think it must be something recent that was taught in the class that is useful here. So in a way, it sort of narrows the set of techniques that you might try. With research, you have sort of no idea when you start what you might need to know.
Difference.
Next year, I think you have completed 30 years of the Cornell faculty. Are there any big changes that you have witnessed at Cornell that you'd like to share with us? I know there's a new building, and that's super exciting. Yeah.
Sure, 30 years, long time. I wasn't thinking about this. Yeah, there are lots of changes. Yeah, we do have a new building, a beautiful new building. Maybe intellectually, the changes in computer science as a field and how computing at Cornell connects to the rest of the university. So we always had both an arts and science and an engineering major, so undergraduates could come major in computer science from both colleges. But computer science as a field much more opened up to many other directions, both nationally and in particular at Cornell. So we have this college level unit, the CIS, Computing and Information Sciences, and in part that was formed to make sure that as much as possible Cornell facilitates connecting to the whole university. Cornell has this general motto of wanting to serve all students, and I guess we want to have computing and information and access to information, or being able to handle data and information, to be accessible to all students. So we increasingly teach not only the very popular computer science courses, which many more people want to major in computer science, but also teach courses that are taught or that are taken by many students. Like we just started a freshman data science course. I have been teaching a networks course, where networks here is social networks, which is running, I don't know how many years by now, but it has about 600 students when it's taught. So it's really across the whole university, from all 7 colleges, and definitely all kinds of majors.
And what kind of math prerequisite does this class have?
High school maths.
Oh, that's it. Okay.
We have no prerequisite. One way to phrase it, the prerequisite is that you have to be good enough in maths to get accepted to Cornell as a student. That actually is a pretty high
bar. Yeah.
High bar. Cornell students come with good
SAT scores.
SAT scores. But we don't technically, we teach them a little bit of probability, but don't have a prerequisite for probability. Teach them a bit of game theory, a bit of graph theory, all of this without prerequisites.
I understand. Okay. Well, over the last few minutes, you've shared a lot of interesting ideas for graduate students. Do you have any final words of advice for students beginning their research in theoretical computer science? It could be in terms of how to pick a topic, for example.
I mean, there are some sort of standard big pieces of advice hard to find the right balance between you should explore many things and become generally knowledgeable, and certainly graduate school should not be that you're working on one concrete problem and ignore everything else, but you should also become a computer scientist in a in a broader meaning of the word, but at the same time, if you work a little bit of everything, then you're not contributing so much to anything. So you have to find the proper trade-off, and different schools are different of how they facilitate the trade-off between breadths and depths. So depending on what school you're at, some of them start with rotations to try to actually get you a bit broader, and some start with more just you start a project with an advisor, and it's maybe via courses that most people get.
Correct. Yeah, that's how it's traditionally been, right?
A little bit broader. Different students, you have to push them in different directions. Some of them get narrow right away, and you have to push them to be broader. Other students go the other way; they keep not picking, and there's so many great things you could do, but you need to pick which one you're
right.
Maybe is the right advice.
And
I guess going back to one of your previous points, I guess I should have mentioned, is one way Cornell Computer Science, and actually again nationally changed, is the percentage of women. So I don't exactly know what the percentage was when I joined Cornell in around 1990. Might have been still high.
I was a TA for several courses, and I would say 25 to 30% was pretty common back then. Yeah.
But around the turn of the century, we went through a very big decrease where we barely broke above the 10% women, and we're back again with our graduating classes over, I think, 35% women, and our freshman class is
even higher.
It's close to 50% of those that expressed interest in CS. As you know, most schools, including Cornell, they don't declare a major till their sophomore year. So
I see.
I don't know yet how many will become majors. But historically, this is like a big change, and it certainly makes the environment much more vibrant and much more active. We have an incredibly successful and amazing Women in Computing at Cornell undergraduate activity group. And I think, a large part of our success is thanks to them.
That's great.
They made the environment not only better for women, they made the environment better for everyone. They're sponsoring and doing a lot of activities that are not only good for their members, but good for the whole community, from pre-enrollment advising to mentoring to mock interviews. There are a lot of great activities, and creating an environment helped them. But it's a big change. It wasn't like that
before. That's wonderful. Yeah, and in fact, we'll be meeting some of the members of AWC this afternoon as well. We have a reception planned with you. I wanted to get back to maybe one last related question about going back to graduate students, which is that a lot of time there's a trade-off between spending more and more time reading papers and learning new things versus ignoring sort of what's happening for 6 month periods and just focusing on one problem that you're thinking about. So do you have any thoughts about how to choose that balance between, in a way, depth for search and breadth for search?
Yeah, I sort of meant this in the even exploring areas, but you're right that the same thing happens even within an area.
Right.
It's a hard balance to find, and you do have to find a balance. Like if you want to learn the literature with all what's in the library before you ever get started, then you probably will actually die before that reading is accomplished. So it can take 100 years. At the same time, one has a lot one can learn from the older literature, and certainly painful to rediscover something that someone knew 20 years before you. Though actually, I found some of those things enlightening. Like, you discover something, turns out other people knew it, but had I read it in the paper, I probably would have understood it less than when I discovered it myself.
Absolutely.
So I still feel like, okay, it's not yet publishable because it turns out someone else knew this, but now I feel like I have a foothold, and this other person turned out not to take it as far as I hopefully can take
and
it.
also, sometimes you can come up with slight observations that make their solution much simpler too. That's what I found,
But it's a trade-off, and you have to, make sure. Actually, I find working, with a blank piece of paper and pen for, multiple days in a row can be very frustrating, and mixing it with other things is always useful. I used to attend some, especially as a beginning faculty member. I still went to some classes. I sat through a vision class. I sat through a networking class because learning something else is useful, and it was the right trade-off. Reading papers is useful too. So I guess one should not be spending one's whole week or whole day or whole
Just thinking about one.
just think of either of the two sides, but mixing it. You also understand papers better if you have an open problem you're thinking about. Like if you just read the paper, often people get like line by line, I can follow B follows from A follows and so on down to the end. But to understand what really moves it, it's better to have something unsolved in mind that that this is supposed to be useful for, and that gets one to a better understanding of why it is, or why they're doing what they're doing, why they are doing something better, what are the benefits and limitations of what's in the paper. So mixing the two is definitely the right thing to do, but the right percentage is a balance.
So the last question is something that you already touched upon quite a bit. Gender issues are a big topic of discussion, as you know, both in the public media as well as in computer science departments and tech companies today. Do you have any specific thoughts about what actions faculty in CS departments could do to improve the climate further for women researchers, both, I think, broadly within computer science as well as within the theory community?
So it's definitely a big issue, and there's a lot of discussion out there. So yes, I do have some thoughts. Some is encouraging women and underrepresented minorities that they, just should have just as much potential and possibility of doing computing and theory as everyone else does. It's often a mental block where it doesn't occur to them, or maybe some of them, family, friends, community is telling them this, that this is not what women do, or this is not.
I see.
Minorities do. So one, as a faculty member, one should be more active in encouraging them, because you're counteracting a society that will be slow to change. Hopefully it will change, but that will take a while. In the meantime, we need to try to counteract it and make this suggestion to people that did you consider graduate school? Did you consider doing research? Do you want to try to do research? One also has to have the right community as much as possible. And I guess I found that the percentage of women in the program really helped. So once there is enough of a volume there, and as I said, we also have at Cornell a very active women in computing group. That helps. Department support for this kind of activities, like department offers space, offers funding, some amount of funding. That encourages them to build a community, and they can then support each other.
But in general, when I started my PhD 32 years ago, I remember that the Cornell graduate student group in general was very supportive, and the community was absolutely fantastic. Of course, it was a relatively small program at the time. There were about 80 PhD students. There was no master's program. So we all felt really sheltered, well looked after, and the community sense was very strong. As departments evolve and grow, sometimes that becomes a bit harder.
So then the last part is what you're touching on, that the whole community has to be supportive.
Right.
Like if increasing the minorities and women in computing is the minorities and women's problem, it will never get solved.
I see.
It has to be that the majority wants to be more inclusive. And sometimes, they're in a very big communities, as you said, as the major is growing, there will be some members who are not on this message, or they don't believe in this.
Right.
But if the overall community is supportive, and the overall community wants to be inclusive and wants to counteract the few bad apples who might not
be supportive,
that goes a long way. And thinking about explicitly how your partner finding system works, how you're helping women and minorities to many computer science classes. Coding is partnered these days, which is great for learning to code from each other, but sometimes can be problematic if the partners don't match. So, helping how to make sure that people find a supporting environment. I think there's a lot the graduate school can do in running events for graduate students to sensitize them to these issues, and not just women, but generally
Everybody. Yeah.
minorities of any form, whether it's sexual orientation or
Understood.
ethnic or whatever the form of minority the person
Understood.
is, to make sure we're understanding other people's perspective and trying to be inclusive.
No, that's very, very valuable. And one thing that you mentioned over lunch, which is useful to mention for our audience, is that there's a Theory Women event coming up as part of STOCK in June. And also, actually, one of my ex-PhDs, Barna Saha, is involved in organizing that event. So,
Indeed, there is a nice event coming up. I guess the Siri community, along with other computer science communities, have not been ideal. When I was young, or maybe even when you and I were young, the percentage of women in Siri was significantly higher than the percentage of women in computing overall. And right now, that's not the case. Siri is about the same as all other areas or many other areas of computing, which is really sad. And we should strive to do better and be more inclusive. And this event at STOCK is
geared towards
trying to make that happen.
Okay, thank you so much. That's the end of my questions. And it's indeed been a pleasure and honor chatting with you. And
Thank you, Samir.
thanks for visiting Maryland. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.